Good morning, everyone, once again, and welcome to our seminar 8 on climate change as an existential threat, security threat, or security issue. I hope you've been learning from the last 7 seminars that we've had, including the guest lectures. And for the recent guest lecture, I'm going to upload the recording today. So once I upload the recording, I'll share the link so that we can have access to the guest lecture. I'll watch and review and take notes. So I don't know whether or not you've been following, but if you've been reading and if you've watched the recording of our last forum or last seminar, sorry, and our forum discussion, uh, you'll notice that we've been looking at climate change not from a scientific point of view, because we are not scientists, we are social scientists. So we are discussing climate change based on climate change diplomacy, how diplomacy is conducted among states to address the security issue of climate change. And then governance. Governance is connected to policy. Policies are very important. And many of you have reviewed our climate change policy and the other policies that I believe, now understand the importance of policy and governance and how we need to follow policies in order to make sure that we do the right thing and we implement policies to see outcomes, tangible outcomes that will help us go forward. So with that, I'll introduce our presenters for today. Today we have Mr. Jonathan Siba representing Group 4, Ms. Alamonai Kenny representing Group 7, Mr. Jeffrey Wenny representing Group 1, Ms. Frijalin Momen representing Group 2, Ms. Valerie Balbe representing Group 5, Ms. Yvonne Amu representing Group 6, and Mr. Philip Karulaka representing Group 3 will be the final presenter. So without further delay, I now hand over the virtual microphone to Mr. Siba. Mr. Siba, please go ahead and share with us your answer or your group's answer to the selected question, assigned question. Sorry.
Yes, Mr. Can you hear me? Can everyone hear me? Perfect. So good morning, Mr. Yegiora and colleagues. I will be presenting on behalf of Group 4 for Seminar 8 on climate change as an existential security issue. Now, our group's guiding question was for this week was based on the reading COVID-19 and Climate Threat Multipliers to Pacific Food and Nutrition Security by Crimp ETL. And our question for the week was, how do climate projections specifically affect key sectors such as agriculture, fisheries, and infrastructure in Pacific Island countries? And what mitigation strategies are most urgent? Now, in this presentation, I will first define some key terms, then I will explain how climate projections are impacting these vital sectors. And finally, I will go over the most urgent mitigation strategies that were presented throughout our reading and research. Now, in the article emphasizes that Pacific Island countries were historically excluded from major global climate change discussions, but through consistent advocacy, regional collaboration, and innovative diplomacy, they have become more visible and influential in international climate negotiations. So I'll begin with some definitions to frame my discussion. The first of these definitions is climate projections. Now, climate projections can be understood as scientific estimates of future climate conditions, such as temperature, rainfall, and extreme weather. Now, these are based on current data and climate models. So for the Pacific, these projections reflect these projections point rapidly to a worsening crisis rather than a distant future. Now, three main projections that are relevant to the Pacific are rising temperatures, where they are placing a increasing stress on ecosystems and agricultural systems, leading to reduced crop yields and shorter growing seasons. The second projection is sea level rise. Now, sea level rise is a major concern. Most Pacific communities are coastal, and the intrusion of saltwater into freshwater supplies and farmland is degrading soil and reducing the amount of land suitable for agriculture. The third is the increase in extreme weather events such as cyclones and floods. They are disrupting communities and food production while damaging key infrastructure. Now, these trends are not occurring in isolation, but instead they are building on existing vulnerabilities and create cascading risks, social, economic, and environmental, that threaten the overall stability of Pacific nations. Now, onto the first part of the question, which was uh, the impact of projected climate projection, sorry. So in agriculture, rising temperatures and irregular rainfall patterns are reducing the reliability of staple crops such as taro, sweet potato, and yams. Since agriculture is central to local diets and economies, even modest yield fluctuations can cause major disruptions. Supporting this, the World Bank notes that climate-related changes like droughts, floods, and saltwater intrusion are increasingly affecting agricultural productivity across the region. Those in 2021. Now, rising sea levels are increasing saltwater intrusion into coastal farmlands, which damages soil quality and reduces crop viability. Cyclones and floods are also occurring more frequently, damaging crops, eroding soil, and making it harder for farmers to maintain consistent harvests. Additionally, the Food and Agriculture Organization has warned that climate variability is disrupting the traditional planting calendars of many Pacific farmers depend on, leading to food insecurity and cultural disconnection. Now, in the fisheries sector, the article itself highlights several serious challenges. First was rising sea temperatures, which are altering fish migration patterns, especially for important species like tuna. These changes affect both food supply and export revenue for many Pacific Island countries. Coral bleaching and ocean acidification are also further degrading marine ecosystems in the Pacific. Coral reefs, which are critical habitats for many fish species, are dying off, reducing marine biodiversity and fish stocks in the region. Now, according to PSC, up to 75% of coastal fisheries in the Pacific may not meet food security needs by 2030, and this is due to ecosystem degradation and climate impacts. So, further conservation international reports that coral bleaching is also decreasing fish stocks and warning sea levels are endangering seas are endangering marine biodiversity essential to local fisheries. These ecosystem changes have ripple effects through marine food webs, leading to unpredictable fishery yields and economic instability in fishing communities throughout the Pacific. In terms of infrastructure, the Pacific is highly vulnerable due to its geography. Many vital assets, roads, airports, homes, they are all located near the coast. Rising sea levels, storm surges, and heavy rain pose severe risk to these infrastructures. Cyclones and floods regularly damage transportation, energy, and water supply infrastructure in the Pacific, disrupting the daily lives and making emergency responses more difficult. The International Panel on Climate Change, in the sixth assessment report, the International Panel on Climate Change confirms that small Pacific Island states are already experiencing infrastructure damage from sea level rise and cyclones, with significant implications for food distribution and emergency services. These impacts across agriculture, fisheries, and infrastructure are deeply connected, and a shock in one area often cascades into others, amplifying vulnerability and deepening the existential threat posed by climate change in the region. Now we move on to the second part of our question, which was what mitigation and adaptation strategies are most urgent. So before diving into the details, I'll define what is meant by mitigation strategies. So mitigation strategies refers to the actions and policies aimed at reducing the severity, likelihood, or long-term impacts of climate change. And these include efforts to lower greenhouse gas emissions, improve infrastructure resilience, safeguard ecosystems, and support vulnerable communities in adapting to new climate realities. Now, in the article, it discussed a range of urgent strategies. A range of urgent strategies across the key sectors that were mentioned. So with agriculture, the article recommended that by developing and using climate resilient crop varieties, plants that can tolerate higher temperatures, salinity, and irregular rainfall, these crops will help maintain food security even under worsening conditions. Improved water management is also crucial. Efficient irrigation systems and rainwater harvesting can help stabilize agricultural outputs in the face of rain variability. Another key strategy is the revival of traditional agricultural practices. So Pacific communities have long relied on agroforestry and diverse cropping systems that are well suited to local environments. Combining these methods with modern techniques can improve resilience while respecting cultural knowledge. Now onto fisheries. For fisheries, it was suggested that a adaptive fisheries management approach be taken. So this involves flexible, regionally coordinated systems that can respond to changing fish stocks and migration patterns. Another one was habitat restoration. So this is particularly for coral reefs and mangroves. These ecosystems support marine biodiversity and serve as natural barriers against coral erosion and storms. Now, the article also recommends expanding sustainable aquaculture to reduce the pressure on wild fish stocks and provide alternative livelihoods and food sources. Now, in the area of infrastructure, resilient infrastructure planning is a recommendation for mitigation, such as elevating roads, stormproofing buildings, and relocating critical infrastructure away from vulnerable coastal zones. Nature-based solutions, as I mentioned before, with the traditional ones. So these nature-based solutions involve things like restoring mangrove forests and wetlands, as they can provide environmental protective benefits and help act as a buffer for communities from storm surges and erosion. Now, across all these sectors, there are a few cross-cutting priorities, critical cross-cutting priorities. The first is enhancing early warning systems and strengthening disaster preparedness. So this can greatly reduce the immediate impact of climate disasters. The second is increasing access to climate finance. Many Pacific Island nations lack the resources to fund large-scale adaptation efforts on their own. So regional cooperation and international support will be necessary to bridge this gap. And lastly, the importance of integrating traditional and scientific knowledge. Local practices developed over generations offer valuable insights into adaptation. So when paired with modern science, they can produce context-specific and sustainable solutions. So in conclusion, climate change is exerting existential pressure on Pacific Island countries. The impact on agriculture, fisheries, and infrastructure are deep and interrelatable, challenging social and economic foundations within the region. Yet the mitigation and adaptation strategies, from resilient farming to an adaptive fisheries management to robust infrastructure planning, offer a pathway forward. By acting on these insights and securing necessary support, Pacific Island countries can strengthen their resilience and protect their people and way of life in the face of an uncertain future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Group 4, and thank you, Mr. Siba, for representing Group. I like the point on traditional practices. PNG, we are rich in Eastern culture. PNG was here before Australia, New Zealand, and America. We have our own culture and system of doing things or ways of doing things that are traditional and indigenous to us. So these are things that we need to go back and do more research and find out and try to incorporate our traditional ways of doing things with modern innovation to come up with solutions to solve issues or problems that are affecting us now. Let's listen to Ms. Kenny representing Group 7, also on the same review of the same article by Grimp and others in the book Pacific Regional Security.
Good morning, Mr. Yegiora and colleagues. Can everyone hear me? Okay. I am Lamanai Kenny, and as mentioned, I will represent Group 7 to present our findings on the question allocated to us for this week. The question reads, Crimp et al. Emphasizes the need for evidence-based policymaking to combat climate challenges. How can Pacific Island nations strengthen collaboration between scientists, policymakers, and local communities to develop effective climate adaptation and mitigation strategies? So before I give the responses based on the question asked, I would just like to give a brief summary on what the chapter, or rather the fourth subheading, is about, which it is taken from the PDF titled Perspective on Pacific Security, pages 41 to 46. The document discusses the threat posed by climate change to food and nutrition security in Pacific Island countries, emphasizing their reliance on agriculture and fisheries. Climate variability worsens food insecurity, particularly post-COVID-19, with women facing greater challenges. It identifies gaps in policies and resources to address food security, climate change, and gender equity. The document calls for urgent improvements in governance and support for sustainable food systems to enhance resilience and community well-being in the region. To dive into the responses to the question, my group and I have come up with 3 parts, and they are, firstly, understanding the role of evidence-based policymaking, secondly, strategies for enhancing collaboration, and thirdly, example of successful collaboration in the Pacific. Firstly, understanding the role of evidence-based policymaking, there are 2 questions, and the first one reads, why is evidence-based policymaking crucial for addressing climate challenges in Pacific Island nations? The first reason being informed decision-making. Reliable data and scientific evidence are essential for policymakers to create effective climate adaptation and mitigation strategies, addressing issues like rising sea levels and extreme weather. According to UNEP 2023, the United Nations Environment Programme emphasizes the importance of evidence-based decision-making in the Pacific, highlighting that quality and readily available data are crucial for long-term planning and adaptation to climate change. The second point being strengthening collaboration. According to ICAT 2024, effective climate action requires partnerships among scientists, policymakers, and local communities, allowing tailored strategies that meet specific community needs. The Integrated Vulnerability Assessment, or IVA tool, has been employed by governments in the region to collect data that informs community resilient planning. And the third point, addressing cultural and societal factors. As stated in Frontiers 2019, evidence-based approaches help integrate socio-cultural attributes into climate policies, ensuring they are effective and community-driven. Integrating traditional knowledge with scientific data improves climate adaptation strategies in the Pacific. Now to the second question under understanding the role of evidence-based policymaking, it reads, how can scientific research directly influence the development of effective climate adaptation strategies? Scientific research can be used for the Pacific Islands due to their unique challenges and opportunities when it comes to climate adaptation in terms of the first point, understanding vulnerabilities. Research identifies islands most at risk from climate threats, allowing prioritization of critical infrastructure for protection or relocation. And the second point, incorporating indigenous knowledge. Combining traditional knowledge with scientific research, such as sustainable fishing practices or traditional weather forecasting methods, can enhance resilience. Pacific Islanders have long histories of living in harmony with nature, and combining this wisdom with scientific data creates stronger adaptation plans. MacLeod et al. 2019. Moving on to the second part, which are strategies for enhancing collaboration between scientists, policymakers, and the community. The point there is strengthening collaboration. So that is to implement community-based participatory action research to engage locals in climate action. And the other point is establish networks connecting scientists, policymakers, and community leaders for knowledge exchange. So you may wonder how the local communities can contribute to climate policy. Well, they can contribute their traditional knowledge on sustainable land management, engaging in community-led initiatives that promote resilience, and providing feedback during monitoring and evaluation processes. This inclusive approach ensures that policies are context-specific and adaptable to local realities, ultimately leading to more effective climate strategies. Lastly, before I conclude, I will provide an example from the Pacific Island nation to show the successful collaboration which has improved climate resilience. The Tuvalu Coastal Adaptation Project demonstrates how international partnerships and evidence-based planning can strengthen climate resilience in vulnerable island nations. United Nations Development Programme 2017. TCAP was launched in 2017. It aims to enhance climate resilience in Tuvalu against sea level rise and storm surges. Key initiatives include constructing coastal defenses such as berm-top barriers and seawalls, and land reclamation efforts in areas like Funafuti, Nanumea, and Nanumanga. These three places that I've just mentioned are small islands in Tuvalu. The project also features an online coastal hazard modeling platform for planning and risk reduction. So based on this example that I have just given or stated, there were three key success factors that were used in the project. Firstly, international collaboration. Secondly, evidence-based planning. And lastly, community engagement. In summary, the presentation addresses climate change as an existential security issue for Pacific Island nations, focusing on the importance of evidence-based policymaking for effective climate adaptation and mitigation strategies. Key points include the need for reliable data to inform decisions, the integration of traditional knowledge with scientific research, and strategies for enhancing collaboration among scientists, policymakers, and local communities. The presentation highlights successful initiatives like the Tuvalu Coastal Adaptation Project, which emphasizes international partnerships and community engagement to build resilience against climate threats. Thank you, and that is all from Group 7.
Thank you very much, Group 7 and Ms. Kenny, for a very insightful answer to the question. I agree with the point on context specific. Definitely our laws and our policies, we need to incorporate our local communities in the formulation of our laws and policies. So we formulate laws and policies that are relevant, that are context specific, and that will help us really address issues that are affecting our community. Many times we adopt laws from Australia and from New Zealand and from other countries' external policies and laws, and this does not really go well with or match our context and help us address our issues. So this is a big challenge, and I hope you future policymakers and communication experts are taking note of this. And if you have any questions, comments, please use our forum for this week. We'll move on to our next presenter for Group 1. We have Mr. Weni representing Group 1.
You all can hear me. Okay, once again, good morning, Mr. Yegiora and everyone. I will represent Group 1 in this seminar. So in this seminar, our allocated statement and question reads, Trundle discusses the interaction of humanitarian aid and climate resilience in the Pacific Island countries. So the question is, how can Pacific nations ensure that humanitarian aid programs effectively address long-term challenges posed by climate change rather than focusing solely on immediate disaster response? So before going into the discussion, let's understand these two concepts, humanitarian aid and climate resilience. So what is humanitarian aid? So according to document 2025, humanitarian aid is a form of assistance designed to save lives and alleviate sufferings during and after crises, such as floods, famine, or conflicts. So aid is essential for addressing the immediate needs of the affected population and laying the groundwork for long-term recovery and development. So what is climate resilience? So according to the Center for Climate and Energy Solution 2019, climate resilience is the ability to prepare for, recover from, and adapt to the impacts of climate change. Okay, now to the discussion. So Trundle discusses on the interaction of humanitarian aid and climate resilience in the Pacific Island countries. So he emphasized on the importance of informal systems and community-based approaches to address climate change issues. So from his discussion, we noted several key points, and the key points are informal settlements, integrating traditional knowledge and urban resources serve as a critical adaptation pathways. Informal governance structures such as chiefs and customary practices support community resilience by enabling responses to climate-related shocks. And humanitarian aid can complement informal systems by providing immediate relief during disasters, but its effectiveness is often limited by a lack of engagement with informal attributes of resilience. Okay, urban expansion pressures pre-urban areas, undermining food security and productivity. Regional cooperation, such as the Pacific Humanitarian Pathways, is essential for coordinated response to climate-related disasters. Social-cultural mobility, including the translocation of rural resilience into urban areas, plays a critical role in climate adaptation. And land tenure arrangement is significantly impact urban climate resilience, and aid program must align with local systems. And the last point is community-led solution, leveraging traditional knowledge and practices are vital for effective climate resilience, and immediate aid and long-term infrastructure improvement are needed for informal settlements. So these are some key points highlighted in this discussion. Okay, now to answer the question, how can Pacific nation ensure that humanitarian aid programs effectively address the long-term challenges posed by climate change rather than focusing solely on immediate disaster response? So to answer the question, we have identified and come up with 5 sustainable strategies or ways. So the number one is to focus on food security and livelihoods, addressing climate impacts on agriculture and fisheries by promoting sustainable practices and supporting local food production systems. For example, promoting sustainable practices such as implementing sustainable farming techniques such as agroecology or permaculture to increase crop yield and diversify production. So this will provide communities with a stable and varied source of food, and that creates a resilient and equitable society. And the second point is to promote green infrastructure, such as supporting renewable energy systems, sustainable water management, or establish green spaces, such as green spaces are like the botanical gardens or the nature parks in urban areas, and build climate resilience housing. So yeah, with the impacts of climate change, several Pacific nations such as Papua New Guinea, Samoa, Timor-Leste, and Vanuatu have already promoted green infrastructure. Like in PNG, a classic example of green infrastructure is the nature park in Port Moresby or the botanical garden in Leh. With such infrastructures are crucial in a way that they help mitigate climate change by absorbing carbon dioxide, reducing greenhouse gases emission, and help mitigate the effects of urban heat. So generally, it contributes towards the mitigation of climate change. Then third point is localization of aid and decision making. It's by humanitarian programs should be guided by local knowledge, leadership, and priorities, strengthening local governance structure and supporting community-based adaptation initiatives, ensuring that aid is responsive to both cultural and environmental contexts. So this includes funding local NGOs and customary institutions, which are often the first responder and long stewards of community resilience. And the fourth point is capacity building and technology transfer. By investing in technical training, digital infrastructure, and local capacity building, equips Pacific communities to manage climate risk independently over the long term. So this also includes facilitating access to climate data, forecasting tools, and resilience technologies. And the last point is Pacific government to prioritize long-term initiatives. So the government of Pacific nations should prioritize the creation of long-term initiatives to mitigate the effects of climate change in their respective countries by utilizing full humanitarian aid assistance rendered by the international development partners or donors agencies. So the proposed initiative must focus on measures such as the upgrade of healthcare systems and infrastructure development, as well as improving people access to much needed government services before the occurrence of climate change related disasters or other natural hazards in the region. Okay, to the conclusion, to conclude, Randall's insight underscores the meaningful resilience comes and not just from surviving the next cyclone, but from reshaping the system that determines who thrives in a climate impacted future. Therefore, by adapting these strategies, Pacific nations can ensure that humanitarian aid contributes to long-term climate resilience and sustainable development, rather than being limited to immediate disaster response. And that brings us to the end of the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wani, and we also thank your group one, for working with you to put together an answer to share with us. We'll move on to the next presenter. Representing group number 2, we have Ms. Momen.
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me? So good morning, everyone. I will be representing Group 2 in this seminar's presentation under the theme Climate Change as an Existential Security Issue. Building on from Jeffrey's group's information, our reading for this week is found in the book Perspective on Pacific Security under the theme or content of food, environment, and livelihood, specifically on Alexi Trundle's paper titled Climate Resilience Through Social Cultural Mobility, Reframing the Pacific Informal Settlements as Critical Adaptation Pathways, pages 70 to 73. Our given question reads, according to Trundle, cultural practices plays a significant role in shaping community resilience. How can Pacific Island nations integrate traditional knowledge and cultural values into national and regional strategies for climate adaptation and mitigation? This presentation will begin with a summary of Trundle's paper, and then we will discuss the factors of traditional knowledge and cultural practices given in the reading before moving on to answer our given question. In summary, the reading tells us that the Pacific Islands Forum, who adopted the Bow Declaration, recognized climate change as a major security threat in the Pacific. However, they have overlooked how climate change has helped the cultures and communities of the Pacific people and how mitigation as a result of climate change is a big deal. Trundle suggests that the way communities naturally help each other and their traditions are actually powerful tools for dealing with climate change, especially when people move to cities. His research looked at 6 groups of people who have moved from the rural villages to the capital cities of Vanuatu, which is Port Vila, and the Solomon Islands, which is Honiara. The research found that when people move from rural areas to the capital cities, they bring their strong community spirit and cultural practices with them. This can actually help the city adapt to climate change. A report by the Secretariat of the Pacific Regional Environment Program stated that indigenous Pacific people possess valuable traditional knowledge that enable them to monitor weather patterns way before the introduction of technology. It was how they were and continue to be resilient in the face of a changing climate, 2023. Chandal's research illustrated the existing role of these factors in community resilience, particularly within the informal urban setting. These 4 factors found in Chandal's research are traditional knowledge as adaptation, cultural values as social resilience, translocation of resilience or the role of informal settlements, and limitation of formal systems. Let us briefly discuss these factors of traditional knowledge and cultural values found in the reading. Number 1, traditional knowledge for adaptation. The reading gave a few examples of traditional knowledge, and they include the accounts of traditional housing resilience during the cyclone Palm in Vanuatu, the traditional know-how that migrants brought with them to urban settings, which was relevant for survival skills in times of natural disasters, the one-talk system, which provide a form of community support during troubling times, and the informal food production systems based on traditional land tenure and practices. Traditional knowledge is proven to have time-tested adaptation strategies because it has been tested for generations. Traditional knowledge passed down for generations understands the local environment and copes with extreme weather. It also uses nature wisely, meaning traditional homes were local materials and designs that suit the climate. Number 3, it has equipped people with valuable skills. Migrants have knowledge about the environment, resource management, and one-talk support system. All these are locally relevant solutions to climate change because they are content-specific, cost-effective, and culturally appropriate. The second one, which is cultural values for social resilience. The reading emphasized on the practice of one-talk system, which I believe we are all familiar with. It involves reciprocal obligations and support based on shared cultures and identity. Kinship is an important part of the one-talk system, and its responsibilities extend beyond immediate family to a wider network of relatives. This creates a sense of community among migrants even when they are far from home. The value of the one-talk system and kinship is closely tied to the Pacific Islanders' lifestyle and plays a vital role in their social network because these values create community support and coping mechanism during natural disasters, often exceeding formal aid. Number 3, the role of informal settlements. The government support played only a secondary role at the community level. Despite the lack of support, the informal settlements or migrants have endogenously developed resilience systems based on traditional governance and customs. According to Chandel, translocation of rurally derived community resilience into the Pacific cities can play a crucial role in supporting climate adaptation pathways within Pacific Islands. Page 17. Number 4, the limitations of current formal approaches. 2 shortcomings of government support and urban planning in addressing community needs highlighted in the readings are: number 1, a lack of proactive and adequate government support and urban planning in guiding the development of these settlements. Chandal stated, informal settlements in the Pacific have been both understudied and broadly left to emerge without formal government or civil intervention. Number 2, the failure of formal urban systems to provide basic necessities like water, sanitation, electricity, and other infrastructure to this significant portion of the urban population. As Chanel put it, while lacking in government services and infrastructure. This underscores the necessity of incorporating existing cultural resilience into climate strategies. Now, To answer that question, how do Pacific Island nations integrate traditional knowledge and cultural values into mitigation and adaptation strategies at the national and regional levels? According to the PNG's National Climate Compatibility Development Management Policy 2014, mitigation and adaptation strategy is a comprehensive approach by which mitigation, which is reducing greenhouse gas emission, and adaptation, that is preparing for climate impacts like sea level rise and extreme weather, is integrated into climate resilient strategies. Let us start with the national level. From the reading, we came up with 3 suggestions for integration at the national level. The first one is education. We suggest that to integrate the traditional knowledge and cultural perspectives into the formal education systems at all levels. The second one is research and documentation. Invest in research to document these traditional practices in order to understand traditional knowledge systems that are relevant to climate change. The third one is community engagement and participations. Have consultations with the local communities and have traditional leaders participate in the development and implementation of climate change strategies. Moving on to the regional level, our suggestions for integration at that level are knowledge sharing platform. Create new platforms or use the existing platforms in the regional level to share practices and lessons learned from integrating traditional knowledge and cultural values into climate strategies across Pacific Island countries. The second one is collaborative research and capacity building. Have a regional research initiative and capacity building program that is focused specifically on the intersection of culture, traditional knowledge, and climate change. The third one is advocacy and representation. Have a unified voice on the importance of cultural practices in climate action at international forums and advocate for their inclusion in global agreements and funding mechanisms. It is important that we integrate traditional knowledge and cultural values into climate resilience strategies at the national and regional level across the Pacific region. Thank you. And this is the end of our presentation.
Thank you, Group 2, and thank you, Ms. Moment, for a very empowering presentation. I hope all of you feel empowered, because all of you come from traditional communities. We have over 800 traditional communities around PNG. So that means PNG, we are rich in traditional knowledge. And what are we doing to preserve this knowledge and document it and share what we have done traditionally over 2,000-3,000 years ago with those of us now finding or looking for solutions and searching for modern solutions from other countries. So that's something for us to think about. It's thought-provoking. It's a challenge for us to go back, do more research, and find out more about our traditional ways of doing things, and to accept the fact that PNG is rich in traditional and cultural knowledge. Let's move on to our next presenter. We'll go back to Krimp and others, and we'll have Valerie or Ms. Balbe, representing Group 5, to share with us what our group has been working on. Valerie, please.
Can you guys hear me? Okay, good morning, Mr. Yegiora and fellow CA and PGIS students once again. As introduced, I will be presenting on behalf of Group 5. For today's seminar discussion, we were given the question, Krimp et al. Highlight the vulnerability of marine ecosystems to climate change. How might rising ocean temperatures and acidification influence tuna migration patterns and the economic stability of Pacific Island nations reliant on tuna fisheries? So before we go on with our presentation, I'd like to define 2 scientific terms within our question. So what is marine ecosystems? Marine ecosystems can be defined as the interaction of plants, animals, and marine environments. By marine, we mean of or produced by the sea or ocean. The term encompasses the salty waters of the earth and is also known simply as a saltwater ecosystem. As over 70% of Earth's surface is covered in water and 95% of that water is saltwater, marine ecosystems are the largest types of ecosystems on the planet. Broadly speaking, the marine ecosystem refers to the oceans and seas and other saltwater environments as a whole. However, it can be divided into smaller, distant ecosystems upon closer inspection. There are various types of marine ecosystems, including salt marshes, estuaries, and ocean floor, the broad ocean, the intertidal zones, coral reefs, lagoons, and mangroves. Derived from Biology Dictionary 2017. What is acidification? Ocean acidification refers to the process in which seawater becomes more acidic because of the excess carbon dioxide in excess carbon dioxide it is absorbing from the atmosphere. Q 2022. For more than 200 years, or since the Industrial Revolution, the concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere has increased due to the burning of fossil fuels and land use change. The oceans absorbs about 30% of carbon dioxide that is released in the atmosphere, and as levels of atmospheric carbon dioxide increase, so do the levels in the ocean. So when CO2 is absorbed by seawater, a series of chemical reactions occur, resulting in the increased concentration of hydrogen ions. This increase causes the seawater to become more acidic and causes carbonate ions to be relevantly less abundant, according to National Oceans Services. In the article, Krimp et al. Highlights the vulnerability of marine ecosystems to climate change by stating the current food production methods of the Pacific Islands and how COVID-19 had affected these particular food production systems. Other factors include variable inflation rates, poor economic growth, negative trade balances, global food price rises, and increasing household dependence on commercial markets affect almost all IPCs and have added to food and nutrition insecurity, according to PCC 2016. Now to answering our given question. How might rising ocean temperatures and acidification influence tuna migration patterns? Rising ocean temperatures can alter the habitats and migration patterns of tuna species, potentially shifting these migratory routes away from the traditional fishing areas. Tuna species like skipjack, yellowfin, and bigeye are migrating to cooler regions, often near to the poles. Marine animals are shifting at a faster rate in the ocean compared to land, with an average movement of about 4.5 miles north each year. Such shifts could lead to the decline of tuna catches in certain regions, affecting the livelihoods of local fishing communities and reducing the economic contributions from tuna fisheries. Tuna is a major source of protein for rural populations, and disruptions in tuna availability would worsen food insecurity in these areas. Moving on to ocean acidification. Ocean acidification can affect marine biodiversity, including the health of coral reefs and fish populations, further jeopardizing the productivity of fisheries. Aquaculture, a developing industry in the Pacific region, will also be affected by changing rainfall patterns, for example, increased sediments and rainfall flooding of some ponds and drought affecting others. As indicated by research by the SPC Secretariat of the Pacific and Community and FFA Foreign Fisheries Agency. The continued warming of the tropical waters of the Pacific will result in a large eastward shift in the location of the edge of the Western Pacific warm pool, a mass of water in the Western Pacific Ocean with consistently high water temperatures, and subsequently the prime fishing grounds for some tropical tuna. As the Pacific Islands are heavily reliant on these marine resources for both sustenance and income, disruptions caused by climate change threaten the long-term stability of the economies and food security. This shift into areas beyond national jurisdiction would result in weaker regulation and monitoring, with parallel implications for the long-term sustainability of stocks, according to Seto et al. 2021. It also emphasizes the importance to flexible management approaches to preserve tuna fisheries and the livelihoods of those reliant on them. Moving on to our economic stability of Pacific Island nations reliant on tuna fisheries. For Pacific Island nations, such as Papua New Guinea, Kiribati, and the Federated States of Micronesia, where up to 70% of the government revenue comes from tuna fisheries, such climate-induced changes would lead to significant economic instability. However, the migration of tuna away from the exclusive economic zones threatens to reduce income from fishing licenses and fees, creating sustainable economic challenges. These nations may adapt to the shifting fisheries, which may include negotiating new fishing agreements or pursuing alternative industries. Furthermore, despite contributing minimally to global emissions, they face disproportionate impacts from climate issues. So in conclusion, the reduction in tuna catch, together with the growing pressures from climate events like cyclones, sea level rise, and seawater intrusion affecting coastal agriculture, could result in a compounded loss of both income and food sources, pushing these nations further into economic and food insecurity. Hence, rising ocean temperatures and acidification not only influence tuna migration patterns, but also have broader economic consequences, jeopardizing the food security and economic stability of Pacific Island nations dependent on marine resources like tuna. Thank you, and this is all from Group 5.
Thank you, Group 5, and thank you, Ms. Balbe, for a very interesting presentation. We'll move on quickly to our next presenter, Ms. Yvonne Amu, representing Group 6, and then we'll conclude with Mr. Karolaka, Group 3. Yvonne, please go ahead. We're all waiting to hear what you have to say.
Thank you, Mr. Yegiora. Can you guys hear me? Okay. I'll be representing Group 6 for the presentation. So before I discuss, our reading for this week is from the perspective on Pacific security, COVID-19 and climate, threat multipliers to Pacific food and nutrition security. Before discussing the question, I'll be reading an extract from the reading on how the region's food security is affected. So subsistence from food production forms a significant part of household income, well over 60% in some countries, but also varies greatly across the region. Variable inflation rates, poor economic growth, negative trade balances, global food price rises, and increasing household dependence on commercial markets affects almost all Pacific Island communities and have added to food and nutrition insecurity by SPC 2016. Agricultural production in large parts of the Pacific is well below its inherent potential, with recent analysis by Farrell and others 2022, finding that between 1980 and 2006, crop production in the region, excluding Fiji and PNG, declined from 1,200 to 800 grams per capita per day. As stated by Pacific Pharma Organization 2024, the COVID-19 pandemic highlighted the importance of local food production, emphasizing the role of a traditional farming system in ensuring food security. Farmers and their traditional practices are pivotal to achieving the Pacific 2050 strategy vision of a resilient Pacific region, categorized by peace, harmony, security, social inclusion, and prosperity, ensuring that all Pacific people can lead free, healthy, and productive lives. So thank you. Moving on to our question. According to Crimp and all and others, agriculture in the Pacific faces significant threats from changing rainfall patterns and extreme weather events. What role can climate resilient crops and traditional farming practices play in safeguarding food security in the region? So before answering the question, let us understand three terms that are used in the question: climate resilient crops, traditional farming practices, and food security. What are climate resilient crops? These are crops varieties specifically bred or selected to withstand climate stresses like drought, heat, and flooding. By adopting these crops, farmers can reduce crop losses and maintaining productivity even in the face of changing environmental conditions. For example, some climate resilient crops include drought resistant varieties of staple crops like cassava and sweet potato, which are important food sources in many Pacific Island countries. The second term, what are traditional farming practices? Traditional farming practices are methods of agriculture passed down through generations, relying on indigenous knowledge, natural resources, and local practices. These methods often emphasize sustainability, biodiversity, and a close connection to the land. They contrast with modern farming, which typically relies on synthetic inputs and machinery. And the third term, food security. Food security is defined by the Food and Agricultural Organization as when all people at all times have physical, social, and economic access to sufficient, safe, and nutritious food that meet their dietary needs and food preferences for an active and healthy life. So to answer the question, what role can climate resilient crops and traditional farming practices play in safeguarding food security in the region? So with climate resilient crops, Pacific food systems are diverse and complex, spanning different geographies and agroeconomical environment. Several crops are known for their resilience to climate change impacts. Root crops like yam, taro, sweet potato, and manioc are crucial staples as they can withstand extreme weather extremes, pests, and diseases in the Pacific. For example, Vanuatu's locally developed and trailed root crop, the golden yam, have been described the most successful root crop created after 15 years of research by Bravo 2022. The root crop is climate resilient and can be used as a source of food security and livelihood for people in Vanuatu. Not just in Vanuatu, but all over the Pacific. In PNG, root crops like cacao, yam, and taro, they play an important role in our rural households, which is like 80% of our population. Having these root crops on a daily basis, staple food because of its climate resilience. The second, the role of traditional farming practices in safeguarding food security. Many Pacific Island cultures have developed sustainable farming methods that have been passed down through generations. These practices have involved techniques like crop rotation, mixed cropping, and the use of natural fertilizers, which can help improve soil health, conserve water, and reduce reliance on chemical inputs. By reviving and adopting these practices, farmers can build resilience and adapt to changing climate change conditions. For instance, traditional knowledge about water management can be valuable in regions facing increasing rainfall variabilities. In the Pacific, Breadfruit Project has been active in 5 emerging Pacific Island countries. Is a clear example of farmers-led research to develop a traditional crop based on merging traditional and Western knowledge. Farmer-led trials evaluating the performance of tree derived from different propagation types have resulted in a package of best practices for mass propagating of breadfruit. Hence, in the long run and in the midst of the race to progress, it is important to look back at the traditional method that our ancestors used over many years. Scholars can learn from these traditional farming practices and study ways to improve them to suit specific landscapes or regions. Furthermore, these practices can be adopted and applied to other crops outside the spectrum of climate change resilience and contribute to the improvement of food security. In this way, we can say that there is a holistic approach towards food security. So in conclusion, food is essential for all living creatures. Climate change is a major factor affecting it, but through these two ways of planting climate resilient crops and using traditional farming practices, they are ways that ensures that we are kept fed, thus safeguarding our regional food security. That is all. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Amu, and we also thank you, Group 6. On to the next presenter, but before we do that, just for me, from my perspective, I think agriculture should be a core subject, not from primary all the way up to secondary level as well, and we should focus on offering more agricultural programs, not only in Unitech, but in other universities because of our rich history. I believe all of you are aware of the Cook agricultural site and its significance to our history, and it shows the world that we were the first people to have cocoa mountains and Yimisa digging barat na Yimisa aulo. Pani cocoa taro na other national vegetables. So it's something for us to think about. We should go back and make agriculture core subject because we have early history of engaging in agricultural practices. It's something for us to think about. Mr. Karolaka, please conclude our session.
Can everyone hear me? Okay. Sare Lareva in Twaripi language in Kerama means good day everyone. So today I want to talk about a critical issue facing Pacific Island nations, the unequal impacts of climate change and the pivotal role of governance in achieving climate justice. So the question that was assigned to our group for this week's seminar reads, Trundle emphasizes the importance of governance structures in addressing the unequal impacts of climate change. How can Pacific Island nations advocate for climate justice on the global stage while ensuring that governance mechanisms at home promote equity and resilience among their most vulnerable communities? So to introduce the presentation, climate change has been identified as a major threat to the survival and development of Pacific Island nations. The impacts of climate change, such as sea level rise, ocean acidification, and extreme weather events, disproportionately affect these small island states, worsening existing social and economic inequalities. In this context, Trundle 2020 emphasizes the importance of governance structures in addressing the unequal impacts of climate change and promoting climate justice. This seminar presentation explores how Pacific Island nations can advocate for climate justice on the global stage while ensuring that governance mechanisms at home promote equity and resilience among their most vulnerable communities. So the realities of climate change are disproportionately felt by vulnerable communities, and nowhere is this more evident than the Pacific Island nations. Rising sea levels, intensified cyclones, and changing rainfall patterns threaten livelihoods, displace communities, and even jeopardize the very existence of these nations. But beyond advocating for global action, Pacific Island nations are also facing with ensuring that climate resilience benefits all their citizens, especially the most vulnerable. This is where governance structure becomes crucial. As Peter Trundle argues in his 2018 paper, titled Climate Governance and Development in Small Island Developing States. Climate change, the effectiveness of climate adaptation efforts hinges significantly on the quality and inclusivity of governance mechanisms. Trundle emphasizes that poorly designed policies or ineffective governance can worsen existing inequalities and leave marginalized communities even more exposed to climate risks. So what does this look like on ground? The first point is relocation of challenges. Forced displacement due to sea level rise often disproportionately impacts indigenous communities with strong ties to ancestral lands. The second point is resource competition. Scarce resources like fresh water become even more contested, leading to social tensions. The third point is unequal access to adaptation measures. Funding for climate adaptation projects may not reach the most vulnerable communities due to governmental hurdles or lack of local capacity. The fourth point is local cultural heritage. Climate change threatens the cultural heritage and traditional knowledge of Pacific Island nations, particularly for those most reliant on natural resources. Pacific Island nations have been at the forefront of climate justice advocacy, emphasizing the need for historical responsibility and common but differentiated responsibilities in addressing climate change. These nations have been actively engaging in international forums such as the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change and the Paris Agreement. To advocate for more ambitious climate targets and financial support for adaptation and mitigation efforts. Given these challenges that I have mentioned previously, how can Pacific Island nations effectively advocate for climate justice on the global stage? Their voices, though representing small populations, carry immense weight, and here are some key strategies. The first point is the first point is strengthening diplomatic ties. Pacific Island nations can strengthen their diplomatic ties with other vulnerable countries and like-minded states to build a strong coalition that can influence international climate negotiations. The second point is leveraging scientific evidence. Pacific Island nations can leverage scientific evidence on the impacts of climate change on their communities to foster their advocacy efforts and demonstrate the urgency for the problem. The third point is utilizing traditional knowledge. Pacific Island nations can utilize their traditional knowledge and practice in climate change adaptation and mitigation to demonstrate the resilience and innovation in the face of climate crisis. But effective global advocacy must be coupled with robust governance at home. While advocating for climate justice on the global stage is crucial, Pacific Island nations also need to ensure that governance mechanisms at home promote equity and resilience among their most vulnerable communities. Toronto 2020 identifies the following governance mechanisms that contribute to climate justice in the Pacific Island nations. 1. Participatory decision-making. Pacific Island nations can adopt participatory decision-making process that involve local communities, especially women and marginalized groups in climate change adaptation and mitigation efforts. 2. Integrated governance. Pacific Island nations can adopt integrated governance approaches that consider the social, economic, and environmental dimensions of climate change and ensure that policies and programs are aligned with national development goals. And 3. Adaptive governance. Pacific Island nations can adopt adaptive governance approaches that enable them to respond to the changing impacts of climate change and build resilience in their communities. An example of a case study is in Fiji, the relocation of the village of Ambuni do Golawa, the first community in Fiji to be relocated due to climate change, involved in extensive community consultation and participation in the planning process. While challenging, this example demonstrates the potential for a participatory approach to managing climate-induced displacements. In conclusion, addressing these unequal impacts of climate change and promoting climate justice in Pacific Island nations require a multi-level governance approach that involves both international advocacy and domestic governance mechanisms. By strengthening their advocacy efforts on the global stage and promoting equity and resilience through the governance mechanisms at home, Pacific Island nations can contribute to a more just and sustainable future for all. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Karulaka, and thank you, Group 3, for sharing with us your answer. So this brings us to the end of our seminar, but there are few things that takeaway messages that we need to reflect on after listening to all our presenters, 7 presenters, represented groups and present. I think the main one is going back to our culture and tradition and finding solutions, studying our culture, traditional communities, our way of doing things, our way of talking, making garden, building houses. These are indigenous knowledge that we have lost over time. So we need to go back and do research and find out how our ancestors lived in the past, what type of plants they took for medication, for boils or sores or for malaria or for other diseases, and how they manage the houses, build the houses, how they make the gardens. All these are traditional indigenous knowledge that we need to really go back and revive and study. And it's a good challenge for you future policymakers to think. And once when you move out of this university, this space, and move into the next phase of your life, you can look at what we can do collectively and as a country and try to influence changes. Also, good governance is based on, it's dependent on the implementation of policy. So, regardless of whatever issues that we're looking at, climate change, cybersecurity, transnational crime, if we want to manage all these issues, we have to follow policies and laws that we've put in place. If we don't follow policies effectively and then do monitoring and evaluation, you see that people will do things on their own accord. People will move and pursue their interest. At the end of the day, human beings are egoistic. We pursue our interest. We try to fulfill our self-interest. So having in place policies and laws are good in terms of good governance. If we don't follow policies, then we do things that are not in line with good governance. We entertain corruption. So that's the point I'm trying to make. So stressing on the need for us to really have in place policies that are contextual, that are related to us and our communities, and then us implementing it effectively at the different levels, not only at the national level, but also at the provincial and local and community level. So when we follow these policies, these laws, then we make sure that we address, or we ensure that we address all these issues that are of concern to us. So, that's all. Maybe stop here. I encourage all of you to continue the conversation in our discussion forum for this week. And I believe Friday is a public holiday, right? So we have no class on Friday. So we have your submission for review to next week. So we'll meet again the following week to look at our final topic, which is transnational crimes in PNG. So I'll see all of you the following Monday. You all have a good day and thank you very much for attending and take care.